The reason why we're here is to really connect the caregiver patient experience. I think it's important for us to talk about it and to provide advice and paint a realistic picture that patients aren't the only ones who are affected by HS. It's also family members as well. So we have some questions, but first I want the panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who you are, your experience. Do you have HS? Are you a caregiver? Who are you?
Hello, my name is Eris. I have had HS for a very long time. I have needed a caregiver partially since 2007, and I have pretty much needed a full-time caregiver since probably about 2012. And a lot of that care work has fallen to my mom, who's a nurse, and my sister primarily. And that's pretty much me. I'm all about HS, and I love animals, and I raise some chickens. And you know that about me, you know me.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I'm Eris's little sister, but I have very much that older sister mentality. So, you know, I go fisticuffs if someone is talking about her, or when she's had to go through bad experiences with HS, I get very defensive on her behalf. I do have HS myself. It's nowhere near to the degree that she has, but I do help her with daily assisted living issues that she needs when she's having a major flare and she can't feed her chickens or take care of something. I've helped do dressing changes and things like that when she needs it. So, and we're family, so that's what we do.
My name is Ebony. I've had HS since I was diagnosed in 2011, but I had my first flare in 2010. When it comes to HS right now, I'm pretty much managed, but in the beginning, it was really, really bad to the point where I couldn't even dress myself. So my husband took care of me a lot during the early years of me having HS.
I'm Rajan, and I've been a caregiver since, I guess, 2011. We got married in 2010, just to let you guys know where it is, how long it's been basically with us since marriage. As a matter of fact, I think on the first spot that popped up, she had a Band-Aid on. It could have been on our wedding day. I'm not 100% sure. And then it went from there to what it actually ended up becoming and us understanding what it is. So that's me.
That's beautiful. So I want to get into the conversation of, I just want to dive in. So how do you balance caring for someone with HS as a caregiver, but also take care of yourself at the same time? Because it can be difficult when you're pouring yourself into someone else. And not saying that, showing up for a loved one is taxing, but it can be, because you're having to take care of them, a household, take on extra duties and things of that nature on top of the things that you have to do and showing up for yourself and things of that nature. And some of those things can fall to the wayside. So for those of you who have either mastered it or are still learning, what do you do?
Me personally, I just show up and keep going. That's all that my parents ever taught us to do. Like, you have to be there. You have to be there to support your family. And if I'm not there for her, then she's going to suffer. She's not going to be able to take a shower by herself. She's not going to be able to dress herself. She's going to have these oozing wounds that she cannot reach. And so as far as balancing it, I don't know if I would say balancing it. It would just be something else that I continue to do. It's just one more thing in my day that I do on my schedule.
And if I can add to that, part of what I try to do as a patient is I realize that, and we used to work at a hospice, so we saw caregiver stress a lot, and they emphasized a lot care for the caregiver. So I will try and do things where it'll just be me and my sister, and we'll go out to a nice lunch, or we'll go out to a movie, or we'll do something just for
We'll fly
us.
to Detroit for Sisters Weekend.
So we try to have that balance, but it's still very difficult. You just have to keep that in mind without guilt, because there's guilt on both sides. You feel guilty as a patient for having to put that on somebody, and I know Kristen has expressed to me that she feels guilty as a caregiver, one, that she's not able to always give me the care that I may need, or that, especially with HS, that the care can hurt. So you have to kind of let go of, for both, for the patient and for the caregiver, you have to let go of that guilt in order to get through it.
I kind of want to, before I pass it, I want to lean into that a little bit, because when you talk about the guilt, I think that's important. So as you're processing that guilt, what do you do if you can't show up? You know, how do you, what is the supplemental like care? Or do you
Just
both
eating.
compromise? What's the situation look like?
I try and have a backup. Usually the backup would be my mom. Recently, my mom's gone through a lot of surgeries, so she's had to be the person also receiving care. Sometimes it is a lack of care, and you just have to keep an eye on it and say, okay, something's got to give, and for today, that's going to be one less wound care dressing. Or for today, that might mean you have to wait a few hours for a shower or something that you need, because other needs need to be met that have been pushed off for too long. And you've just got to reprioritize your priorities.
Also, I think just having patience, like you said, things may not happen, ... because people are people. And so really just being patient and understanding, just like for my husband, I used to hate bandage changes. Oh, because they were so painful. But I wouldn't complain. I was just like, let's hurry up and let's just do it and get it out the way. And then I guess we tried to balance stuff with enjoyable stuff too, maybe.
I would say so. I'd laugh, I smile when you said the bandage changes, because at the time I dressed up as the nurse, so with the mustache. So I would try to make things a little bit funny sometimes. I tend to do that. So humor was important. Can I answer the question? Can you ask it again? So
Absolutely. So how do you balance caring for someone while also caring for yourself and making space for that?
Okay. So right now, her HS is managed. And so there's not a lot that has to be done except for like when she gets infusions, preparing for that. So like a couple days before, a couple days after. However, when she was at her worst, there's a couple things, and it's sort of a complex answer to that. With us being newlyweds at the time, we had went through marital counseling, and so we were tied real tight to those vows, so that in sickness and health, which and when you're young, you're thinking that's going to be far off, you know. So within a couple months, that became tested, you know. And so as she became more and more sick, just holding on to that thought and holding on to those vows were what got us through the first stint of things. And I'd say whether I was taking care of myself or not, I wasn't 100% sure. And we had the unfortunate benefit of not knowing even what was going on. And I say unfortunate because a benefit because it was so scary that it was like, you know, how are we going to handle this? What is this to begin with? So I have an appreciation for symposiums and things like this, but 10, almost 15 years ago, we doing trials and trying different home remedies and things like that, and just seeing things get worse and worse. It was so much concern for her that it was like I'm not going to say that I was neglecting myself, but in comparison between my life and things going on at that time for me versus what was going on for her, it was small, you know. And so it was frightening not knowing. So
what do you do with, because we talked about guilt and I think this plays to a bit of your answer. How do you process like seeing someone that you love and care for being impacted by a chronic disease that neither of you can do much about in the sense of, you're trying treatments, you're doing these wound care options, you're, creating a support system, but this is a condition it's incurable. So how do you process like being like a part of that experience, and how do you just process that? How do you process that information? What do you do with that? Like, does that weigh on you? Does that impact the way that you show up? Seeing your loved one going through something like that?
I know for me, it does impact me because it's just sometimes we can't do anything, just sit and cry together. And it weighs heavily, like I can feel it. I can feel how heavy it is because of this situation that she's going through and how bad her HS is. And some days there's just nothing to do but just sit there and be present and be a positive presence for her when she has so much of this other negative going on. And I guess when I'm in the moment with her, I don't really feel it. I feel it afterwards when I'm by myself, and that's okay. So I can take a minute to myself when I'm by myself. But when I'm with Eris, I just try and be present for what she needs from me and just go from there. Because sometimes all we can do is just sit and cry or just when there's nothing else to be done.
Do you all want to answer that too?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I'm just going through things in my head, so I apologize.
No,
but
it's okay.
It's been a long time.
No, it's okay.
Dealing with, so.
It's okay. So I'm just curious how you process just seeing your loved one go through something as difficult as hidradenitis suppurativa, seeing the wounds, seeing them go through different clinical trials and them not working, or taking them to the doctor's office and seeing that their open wounds are seeping and that it's impacting their ability to just their quality of life. How does that affect you?
It's various feelings. It all depends on the stage that she was at. I'd say early on, because it didn't really click on the limitations. I think we went to Chicago one time, and I think this is when it was like, whoa, this is a problem, where she had ended up getting a sore. So sometimes they open and sometimes they don't, right? And sometimes when they don't open, those are worse because they get, like real big. And so she developed an issue almost the size of like a golf ball or baseball, wasn't it? And so here we are on a Chicago trip, and I think it was our first or second time going to Chicago, and we couldn't go nowhere and she had her favorite cousin, and things like that. And I didn't feel guilty, but it was a realization that the quality of life was impacted at that point. And looking and seeing, here she is with her favorite cousin. We from Detroit, they from Georgia. We came here on purpose to enjoy something, and then her not being able to. So that was the first point where it clicked, so that part was sad. Clinical trials, she was in a clinical trial that she was getting worse, evidently worse, and the doctor didn't want to end it. It took another doctor basically to cuss that one out for it to stop. Now I was real mad at that, so that's the anger. Then there was a point where she was on a medication that, or was it medication that caused it, or where all your weight loss happened?
That was with the clinical trial.
Right. So weight loss to where she couldn't even carry her purse. So I'm carrying her purse around, and when you see somebody so frail, I'm thinking she's a healthy size right now, but she was like 110 pounds maybe. Like she had pulled up, and I had to go get her purse and stuff. So that was sad, and it was like, okay, this is gonna be the rest of our life, and so. You just kind of say, okay, this is what it is, and you kind of roll with it. But then we ran into situations like, I think we've discovered, was it Dr. Hazen? where it was, that's when we started understanding what it was, and then you start seeing hope, and then it's like, okay, this can be different, you know. And so, so even with that, there were points where we were thinking, okay, bandage all the time, and so the current treatment has made it almost normal. There's still flare-ups and things, but so it went from scared to angry to accepting, and then some hope.
So my question is for for Eris and Ebony. How do you allow yourself to be taken care of by someone? Because I feel I can imagine that there's also that guilt that comes up for you all as well, of feeling like a burden to the person that you love, or just feeling like a burden in general for your existence. Because, chronically ill people, we don't have safe spaces to exist truly in our illness, and be vulnerable. So how do you allow someone to be there for you, especially if you have had experiences where you've opened that door and have been vulnerable and that person has let you down?
I kind of have a funny story about this. My first, and I've always been, as a child, I was very independent, and growing up I was very independent, didn't like to ask for help for anything. And my first real surgery was in 2007, and after about 3 months, I still had not healed, and the original wound had gone down to the bone. And so I had to go back to work at that point, still with an open wound. Fortunately enough for me, I worked with my mother, who was a nurse, and I also worked with probably about 40 other nurses in the office, my mom was not always available. I had to go up and ask these people who I knew on a work level, open myself up and trust them on a wound in a very private area to do a dressing change that I could not see, could not reach, could not dress. And that was extremely hard. And you see some of these patients, and you have HS for years, and you kind of get over your phobia of privacy. You lose all that privacy, and I think that's part of a contingent of asking for help, is you have to get over that. And if you want to get better, and if you strive to get better, you have to get over your fear of being independent and doing everything on your own. You have to know that it takes a village, and you have to lean on other people, and it is hard mentally. Sometimes I'll sit and I will cry and think I am a burden, but I do have a great family support system that reassures me that I'm not. And it comes full circle, and I think a lot of it is you have to continually work on your mental health. And if you don't continually work on your mental health from a patient standpoint and from a caregiver standpoint, then it's not going to work.
I know for me, I was used to being a caregiver, I guess, because I grew up with my mother and grandmother. My grandmother was much older when I was born, and so I was used to helping with my grandmother, grew up doing that. So when I tried to be independent as long as I could, but then it just came to a point where I couldn't anymore. And I had to accept that. And I remember feeling so guilty that instead of my husband and I, doing fun things, we're at home and he's doing dressing changes and he's giving me baths and he's washing clothes and he's cooking the dinner, he's doing everything, and I'm just laying there, like the guilt that I had. I think at one point I was like, it might have been better if we didn't get married. You could have went and had someone else and just have this awesome life. But we got through it, but that guilt weighed so heavy on me, because especially since we were, still newly married. Within the first, I think, I went from being okay to be totally dependent within the first, 2 years? Less than that. And so I'm like, as a wife, I'm supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z, and I can't. And so I just felt so guilty. But we've always said for us, divorce wasn't an option and we were going to get through it.
So, is there, and this might be a difficult question just because we want to admit as caregivers that you never like resent the person that you're taking care of. But has that ever come up for you? Have you had to navigate something like that, resenting the individual that you've taken care of? And how have you worked through that? Because I can imagine that some caregivers might feel that sometimes, because there's a lot of complex feelings that come up, you know? I don't know if you want to share.
Fortunately for me, I hope I've never felt that way. If I'm being honest, I don't see my sister as a burden or having those complex feelings because I know that she doesn't have anybody else. I know that it's our core family and I can't just leave her to herself. I know that there's times where I'm helping her with a dressing change that she's just in tears, and that breaks my heart. And I can't do anything because I guess I feel guilty too because I'm causing her more pain. And if I don't do that, if I don't do what I'm doing, it's going to be worse in the long run. And, you know, I'll say, Eris, are you okay? And she's just sobbing when I'm doing dressing changes. And she's like, no, keep going. And she'll be, okay, I'm good. That's enough. And so it's like, okay, hands off. You know, she's good. She's good to go. But I don't feel that she's ever been a burden. I feel like sometimes I have to change around my day to make sure that I get her taken care of first, because that needs to happen and that's okay. But I love you. You're my sister. I've never, pain in the butt, yes, burden, no. You know? So I fortunately, I don't have those feelings towards her, and, you know, so.
Oh, she waiting for that answer. No, honestly, I would say if it lasted longer, the condition that she was in at her worst, maybe. But the pace that everything happened for us, and again, with it being so frightening at the time, trying to figure out what was going on, and then as things started to calm down, like seeing surgeries helping and all of these other things, it was more of a relief. So like she was saying, within the first 2 years, becoming dependent, if it lasted forever from that point, then I might have developed that. But then it went that 2 years, and then it sort of started to reverse to where she became more and more dependent. So I would say it didn't last long enough. In order for it, I couldn't say whether or not I would have if it would have lasted longer. I would imagine that it would have been.
But what about maybe after I had Zion? I think I flared because I was off my medication. So you were taking care of me and helping to take care of a newborn.
Well, that was still a whole new experience as well. So so I say the training that I got from taking care of her as a HS patient made it easy when the baby came, right? So she still could do some things, and then I had to do some things for him, some things for her, you know. But it wasn't too much, you know. And so no, it wasn't a big deal. So yeah, so no resentment. But again, if we're being honest, if it lasted longer, probably so. Probably would have built up.
And I know that can be difficult to, you know, because you don't ever want your loved one to feel like they are a burden, but you know what I mean? Feelings come up. And I feel like if we're honest and we create space for the conversation, it normalizes other caregivers who might experience those but feel guilty about those feelings that they feel. But I know that we would all like to think that we're not a burden. You know what I mean? And I think the word kind of gets like a bad rap because it just seems like it's a negative. But, you know, things impact us all, and it can be a lot. You know what I mean? I think a burden just means a lot, and there's probably a better way to frame it, you know?
I think if you're going to think that, it's not you that's the burden, it is the disease that's the burden.
Right.
And that's how you have to frame it.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that framing.
I'm sorry for jumping
Go ahead.
in there, but for those who might, whether it's in the audience or being recorded, but for those who might be feeling the guilt, one of the things, though, that's very beautiful about the whole experience of giving care to somebody is it's really hard to measure love, right? You say, oh, I love you, da-da-da. Like, let's really test it. You know what I'm saying? And when you're giving care for somebody, the person who's actually giving the care doesn't necessarily feel what you might think is a burden. It's their opportunity to actually show and act out that love that they say. So it's a different experience, I think, for the person that is giving that care to actually demonstrate what they're, you know, just saying it ain't as good as you actually doing it. And this gives us an opportunity as caregivers to express it. And so it's not, it was never a burden. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up love because when you say that, I think about platonic and romantic love. And I think that, you know, true love is really showing up for someone regardless of what happens, you know? And, you know, even when you say your vows for, you know, sickness or health, for poor or for rich, you know, for me, for an example, I've seen my parents go through debilitating illnesses, both of them. And I was like, I really saw what love looked like when I saw them take care of each other. And there was a lot of difficult things that happened, but they showed up and they were just like, okay, we have to figure out how to navigate these things, you know. And love is an action word, you know. And it's not, it goes beyond physical, it goes beyond those good moments you have. It's like, okay, when you hit rock bottom, how do you feel about that individual that you're in a relationship with? You know, because everything's not going to be picture perfect and it's not going to be sunshines and rainbow. We would like it to be, you know, but that's not the cards we were dealt, and that's not, you know, what God, the universe, has orchestrated, you know. So I'm sure it can be very healing to have someone show you what true love actually like looks like and feels like. I don't know if either of you all want to comment on that, but
I remember Roger and I was having a conversation. I think we were back at my mom's house at this point, and I was really sick. And I remember saying how I didn't know how tender he was until I had this disease. And he had said that he didn't know how strong I was until we had this disease. If I had to do it all over again, I don't think I would change anything. I think me having this disease probably brought out the best in our relationship. It showed how committed we really were to each other, or really are to each other, I should say. And, you know, if we had this in the beginning of our marriage, you know, these type of tests where some people, I mean, a lot of evidence shows typically, like in a marriage, if a woman gets cancer, there's a good chance her husband will leave when he has to become the caregiver. And so I think for us to experience this so early in our marriage, it's kind of part of our foundation, I think. Just the love and the respect and the understanding and the tenderness we have to show to each other.
did any of you have like a conversation of like asking, you know, whether it was, you know, your sister Eris or your husband Ebony, like, can you take care of me? Like, did you have to ask and like create space for that, or did it just kind of like naturally happen?
I think with us, it just kind of naturally happened. As Kristen kind of alluded to before, our parents were the kind of people of, if there's something that has to be done, You go and you do it because it has to be done. And that's it, no questions asked. So that space just kind of occurred naturally. Okay, Eris needs wound care today, so mom can't do it. Kristen, you know how to do, we're going to teach you how to do it in case. So that just is how that came about.
Yeah, it's never a ask. I think it's just, just realize. It's the way that it happened. It still was like still not knowing what was going on, and all of a sudden now I'm bandaging, and now we're going to appointments and things like that. So no conversation about it. It just, started happening.
It was like you had to just show up. You didn't really have time to like think about it. It was like address the problem or show up in this moment.
Yes, I think the only time that we might have had conversations when we were trying to explore ways to remedy or to do better things, like I think with the goodie bag there, just looking through that when we got it, looking through it, and it's like, oh, they got this in there, so we kind of looked at products together, and so maybe like the approach of how we can manage the situation was a conversation. But as far as whether or not I would care or could care wasn't a question. It's just how do we overcome this or how do we work through this would be something I think we did have a conversation on.
Are there any practical tips that you can give to caregivers as they are working through showing up for, people living with HS, or even if, you have HS, is there any tips that you would give for patients if they don't have a caregiver, but they want to ask a family member or a friend or a loved one to show up for them in any capacity?
Tips for the caregiver: make sure you're taking time for yourself. It is okay to say, I need 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, breathe, but you've got to get that time in for yourself, nobody else. Because in Kristen's role, she's not only my caregiver, she's my mother's caregiver up until a few months ago. She's also my father's caregiver along with me. She's a wife, she's a mother. She needs 5 minutes to herself, so take that time for you. As a patient, I think I've been part of the groups and part of the patient online community for 15 years at least, and I see a major theme of independence in a majority of patients. So I think that it is going to come down to when you absolutely need it, that's when you have to ask. And it's okay to ask because you can't get through this disease by yourself. It's impossible.
I think for HS patients, one, to truly be open about what you're going through. I know I would try to be strong and try to do things myself, but I had to let go of that and be open to receiving help. And if you want to, if you have family members, let them know what you're truly going through. I think at one point my mom was didn't really understand what I was going through until we had to move in with her when we were trying to save up for a house, and then she really saw everything that Rajan was doing for me, because I had kind of kept it hidden from my family. I told them about it. I told them I was going to a doctor's appointments, but she really she really saw what I was going through once I moved in. And then I had to be honest with her, this is more debilitating than what I had let on. And so being honest about what you're going through and how you're feeling as well. I remember I was in a lot of pain. So at one point, I think I was very mean, but I made sure not to be mean to him. I was mean to everybody else at work. But I was making sure, because I'm he's taking care of me, and actually, no one really deserved it. But I was just in so much pain. My fuse was so short. I didn't have like the patients. And so, but I was trying to be conscious of not taking it out on him.
She stole my answer. For the caregivers, just remembering that it's painful. And you can't see pain, and you can't see the level of pain that it is. And so if the person you're caring for is a little bit moody, a little bit of understanding goes very far. Some very practical tips is find good bandaging, good tape, any type of salve or whatever that needs to go over it. Then with tape, skin, when you're bandaging and taping stuff like that, you can develop like rashes and things like that. So like really understanding how to take care of the wound, and staying on top of it, finding ways to, what we did, we would pre-cut and set up all of our bandages in like Ziploc bags, so we would have like a week's worth of it, because she still worked the entire time as well. So just kind of, if you got all of these bandages and stuff like that to do, if you can pre-do some of it, almost like meal preps, if you can pre-do some of that helps.
Oh, remember when we used to have packing parties and your mom would help?
That helped out. Yeah, we got so good at that that we roped family members in,
Because we were open about what was truly going on to our family members. And so when they offered to help us, we took it.
In the space. I'm sorry? Yeah, it was. And when they can help out, it really is a blessing. It's to the point of taking care of yourself. Sometimes you need to let the family, so there's parts that might not, so my brother ain't gonna bandage my wife in certain places, you know what I'm saying? But he can provide some food, stuff like that. So if they can take some of the capacity off for you, allow them to do that as a caregiver. So that, I think, is the tips that I would say is, remember that they might be moody and mean. And you got to be gentle, too, sometimes, because they might not be mean. They might swing the other way and be, sort of down, too. So be mindful of their feelings. Find ways to make it efficient in dealing with it, and let people help out where they can.
I love that. I want to provide a space for the audience to ask questions if they have any. So does anyone have any questions for the panelists? We have another one right there. He's doing it right now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, dude. So when you found out about your HS diagnosis, did you find out at the same time that he did? How did you feel? If you didn't find out at the same time, how did you talk to him about it? How did you not feel ashamed or anything like that when anything intimate was going on, if you had flares or something?
So I believe, because when I had my first spot and I showed it to Raj, didn't you Google? And you were like, I think it looked like this.
Quite possibly.
And so he was like, I think it looked like this, but we should probably ask a doctor. And so the doctor confirmed what he Googled, even though when he Googled it, we didn't see HS on black skin, so I don't even know how you figured that out.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. But I guess we discovered it kind of at the same. I guess we discovered it kind of at the same time. Can I piggyback off of her question?
Of course.
Because you guys are sisters and you both have it. Did you all find out around the same time?
I didn't get diagnosed until years after the symptoms first started. And then we kind of knew Kristen had it, but it wasn't bad enough to where we really needed to do anything about it. It's just like, okay,
Monitor it.
you've kind of got
medication.
mild, just use this body wash and use this and use that. And we kind of kept an eye on it at home. And then a couple of times she had some bad flares, and it's like, okay, now you need to go to my dermatologist and get it actually properly diagnosed and get some treatment for it. So her diagnosis came probably about a decade after mine, technically. But like the diagnosis for mine, we had to do the treatment options for it long before we even knew a name for it.
We hadn't even heard of hidradenitis suppurativa until Eris had to Google her symptoms, because she would go to many doctors and they would just write her off. Oh, you're not bathing correctly, or you need to do this, you need to take care of yourself, you know. And we all know that's a farce. And so she finally was able to find a medical professional that would listen to her and kind of got her on the path of which way to look. And then I remember the day that she got onto Google and she found it. And so she took it to the nurse and they're like, yes, that's what you have. And then that's where we started rolling from, that there was a name. It wasn't in her head. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't for something that she was doing or not doing. And we actually think that it's genetic for us because our grandmother had issues, but, you know, 60, 70, 80 years ago, well, that's just boil. It's a boil, you know. So we had a name, we had a plan, a path to go, so.
Actually, sorry, really quickly. I think that's very interesting because I've never formally gotten a diagnosis, but my grandmother has been struggling with it for years. And when I first saw like any type of flare up, I didn't think much of it because my mother has always had cystic acne on her face. She has acne on her back, and she gets these boils on her breast area and her groin. So I just didn't think it was anything other than what we already experienced. But to see so many people talk about it, I'm like, okay, wow, is this hereditary?
You know, definitely my mother has it, because, and now that I think about it, when I was like a teenager, she was like, just put a warm washcloth on and bring it to the head, squeeze the stuff out and keep it moving. And so now that I think about it, I'm like, she might actually have it too, just not as severe. And I think my grandmother had it as well.
My grandmother's is severe for sure. So thanks for all the knowledge you gave me. My family.
Thank you. Shin? Oh. Did you have your hand? And then Shannon can go next.
Hi, I wondered if any of you would like to just talk about any mental health services that were helpful for you, if relevant, or what you might have done instead of official mental health care.
Mental health services, I saw a therapist for probably about a year and a half and worked with her in the office. And then I've also looked on my own. I will go out and I will find books to help work on my mental health. I will basically go down any avenue. I will use recommendations off of Facebook. I will use recommendations off of TikTok. I have found a lot of good resources. There are a lot of good mental health practitioners that give tips and ideas, especially breathing techniques and exercises. Journaling is fantastic. One of the things I love to do to reset, crafting. The second thing I mentioned earlier, chickens. My mom actually got me, 2-3 years ago, we restarted my chicken flock, and making sure that I have something that depends on me. I have to get my butt up out of bed, go feed them, go water them, collect the eggs, make sure they're okay. That's really good for my mental health, and it takes me out of that space of just thinking about all of the bad in my life, and it gets me away from all of that. So find something that gets you away from all of that, something that's not connected to anything.
For me, in the beginning, Facebook was very important. Finding HS support groups online was my first, I guess, experience with dealing with the mental health, because I was able to talk to people who were also experiencing what I was going through. In 2018, after I had my son, I experienced postpartum depression. And so then I started going to a therapist. And in me going for the postpartum, we started talking about my HS. And she was like, wow, you've been dealing with this for a very long time and with no like professional help. And I was like, yeah, because I had this strong woman syndrome, like, oh, I could just do it myself and I'll be okay. And I still see the therapist to this day. We work on ways to reduce stress because stress can cause you to flare. And like, because life been lifing, you know, I've been going through a lot. And so she helps to refocus me on how do you take care of yourself? What can you do to reduce your stress? And so finding a mental health therapist was very important to me. And I didn't even realize until after I had the postpartum of how much I needed that.
And I would say it's not so much mental health, but for the men that are caregiving for their wife or their significant other, I think it's very important to have either an accountability partner or another guy or a couple guys that you talk to, because if you really want to hold tight to your vows and faithfulness and things like that, you might have to talk to somebody because, you know, sometimes the spots pop up in the fun places if we're going to keep it PG, you know. And so you definitely don't want to deal with those type of situations in isolation. So having somebody to talk to and talk with. Yeah.
Hi, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay for you too. So, you had your first flare when you guys were already together?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't think it was an STD or anything, like, because I wasn't out there like that. And from what my mother was telling me, like, oh, warm compresses, in our family, we get the boils, that's it. You just deal with it and keep it moving. So I did have flares while we were together before we got married, but I didn't know it was HS. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, hey, I don't have anything. That's just something I have. Been having it for a while.
Mm. And so when you saw one of her flares for the first time, like, what did you think? Were you kind of discouraged at one point, or?
No, just didn't know, you know, what it was, you know, things like that. So it wasn't there. It was like, oh, okay.
Right, just work around it, huh?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
like, oh, you got a boil, you know. Yes.
That's great. That's amazing.
So,
Yes, work around it. And so, being that you have family members that had these flare-ups, how did you see them holding themselves up when they were having their worst flare?
I mean, for my mom, she would just put the washcloths on it. She would just squeeze it out. She would deal with it for a day or two. And then for her, it just went away. And it may not come back for like months. And she only had like 1 or 2 areas. Like for me, my arm, at one point, the HS was so bad, it tore away my skin. I didn't have skin under my arms. And so at one point I was like, this isn't what she had. This is something totally... So, and I found out mine was just, I guess, more severe. But for my mom, she was a single mom who was taking care of her elderly mom and taking care of me, working 2 jobs. So she did what she had to do because she had a child to support. She had a mother she had to take care of. And so she probably just powered through, to be honest.
Did it ever affect her personality and how she treated you, how you guys spoke to each other?
I didn't experience that with her. She also had some other medical issues. So at times, I remember sometimes taking care of her when I was younger. But as in mood change or anything, I didn't notice. But her HS wasn't as severe as mine either.
Because you mentioned that, sometimes you would be mean. Sometimes I would be mean, too, when I would have a flare. It really does impact our mood. And I always think, like, you know, having a bad attitude could either affect myself more or like another person more. So having a parent that has it, I would wonder how that would play out. But that's cool that she managed it well.
I also think my mother smoked weed, so I think that I'm serious, but I
Yeah.
think it calmed her mood down,
Oh,
and
that's
so I mean, I don't demonize it, and so if that helped her deal with her pain and being able to show up for her mother and her daughter, I'm all for it.
Right. That's amazing.
I want to talk, just mention, because what she wasn't, her mother has something, but up until Eb defined it, just like for you all, you didn't know what it was. You had to look for the definition. Same thing for you. So I think these symposiums and things like that are going to help people to understand, first of all, what they have. You know, so I think if her mother identified that she had something other than just the old, wives' remedy to how you deal with it, then it might have been a different situation. She would have, she might have said, oh, this is because I have this illness, or this is because. So part of how she dealt with it, I think, has to deal with the fact that she ain't even know what it was either. You know, and I think that's what a lot of people up until this point have to deal with, the fact that I don't know what this is.
I mean, to be honest, HS really, when I was first diagnosed, it still wasn't really out there like that. Medical professionals really didn't know how to deal with it. I remember you coming to the hospital showing nurses how to bandage me because they didn't know he had to come to the hospital sometime to bandage me because nurses didn't know what to do. And so, I mean, even if my mom back then in the 90s knew what it was, the medical professionals really didn't know what to do with it. They didn't have treatments, really didn't know much about it. So luckily now it's more in the forefront and doctors are learning about what this is and how to treat and how to deal with patients.
That's amazing. Well, blessed you two are to find each other and support each other in the areas that you guys need each other. That's beautiful. We need men like you.
Yes. I want to thank you all for being so open and so vulnerable. I know sometimes it's not easy having these conversations, especially with your loved one sitting here, but thank you so much for opening yourselves up, giving us a lens into your own experiences, and then also providing us advice from caregivers to patients to relationships to, familial relationships, friendships, things of that nature. So I want to thank you, and I want to give our panelists a round of applause.
One more question.
Oh, we have another question.
Yes, sorry. I'm just curious, as far as once you guys start getting into family planning and knowing that you guys wanted to have kids, whether the entire panelists have kids, what was that like for you, kind of pivoting into that mindset and, bringing a whole nother human being into the world, knowing that they could possibly get this condition as well as you guys are still learning about it?
It's a great question, actually. So we weren't really planning on having a kid when we first got married. It wasn't a mistake. The thing is, going through the experience kind of made a better respect for life, and so, excuse me. So we kind of, it made us want a kid, actually, versus the opposite of saying we don't want one. It really never occurred to me whether or not he would get it. But the biggest thing was, after going through trials and things like that, could she even have a kid? And so after finding out, then it's like, well, wow, we almost couldn't. You know what I'm saying? As far as we knew, and there was, with her health, it was like there was a point where if you wanted to, you couldn't. So we kind of, in my opinion, hers might be different, but in my opinion, it was like we had the opportunity, we almost lost the opportunity as far as we knew, and so given that, it was like, oh yeah, that's something we could do, so pretty good decision too. Our kid is fun.
I remember thinking at one point, I couldn't have kids, and even if I could we handle that? Because I was so sick, And I'm like, it wouldn't be fair for him to have to take care of me and to take care of a baby. But once we found the right treatment for myself, we gave it a couple years. We were like, well, maybe we should try, and let's just see what happens. And so I think we were married 7 years before we had our son. And it used to irk me, even when I was really sick. People would ask me, well, when you're having kids, because you've been married, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, that's such a personal decision, and you don't know what I'm physically going through. Like, I could barely take care of myself. I can't even see me bringing a kid into this world. And so I'm like, let me get myself together and then make that decision, but that's none of your concern. And so I had to deal with that a lot, because people assume because you're married, oh, you all should be having kids right away. And that wasn't the case for us, because I was going through this illness, and I needed to make sure I was healthy enough to even be there, to do that, and had the right mindset to do that. But once I was able to get myself together, we were like, I think we can do this. And the pregnancy was slightly high risk because of the medication I was on. I was on Remicade, and so after 20 weeks, you have to stop the treatment because it could cross the barrier, blah, blah, blah. But my flares became so bad that I had to continue the treatment throughout the pregnancy. And so it was some things I had to give up. Like, I had wanted to have a baby at a natural birthing center, but with that condition, that wasn't an option. So I had to have a baby at a hospital. So it was certain things I had to trade off. When my son was born, there were certain vaccinations he couldn't get because he was on Remicade, because I was on Remicade, and because I got it after 20 weeks, he was exposed to it. So there were certain things I had to change around. Like, I was exclusively breastfeeding. And so during the times when I had my infusions after I had him while still breastfeeding, I had to change his vaccination schedule, because the weeks that I got Remicade, he couldn't get vaccines. And so it's a lot of planning when you're trying to have a kid, and that people on the outside don't understand at all. And so whether you have a kid or not, that's a personal decision between you and your partner and no one else. Also finding the right doctor to help navigate that, and to be able to work with your OB, and working with, I don't know, in my case, I had to also bring in a maternal specialist. And so it's just a lot of planning on our end. But don't let anyone pressure you. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for not having kids. Because at the end of the day, you are the one that has to take care of that child. You and your partner, no one else. All they have are opinions. They don't even have dollars. They just have opinions.
Okay. I don't know how much time we have, but there's another mom on the stage too. Did you have to have?
As far as my husband and I family planning, it wasn't a big issue because, like I said, even though I have HS, I don't have it near as bad as Eris does. I do have a fear and concern for my child that he will have it, because when he was probably about 6 or 8 months, he had a spot, and it was just like, that's classic. So, and since then, he's had it about maybe 2 or 3 more times, and he just turned 12. But yeah, when he was a baby, I could see the spots. But thank God, nothing right now. But I do have that fear and concern that he's going to have it. But I'm just...
Well, I have a question for you. So when you saw the spots, did you let the pediatrician know? Did the pediatrician say anything?
Pediatrician didn't know what it was. and even at that time,
But he still has a scar from the first
yeah,
one that he got.
he still has a scar on his buttocks from it. So 12 years later. So the pediatrician didn't know. They're just, oh, it's a boil, or you need to change his diaper more. I'm like, are you kidding me? You should see my diaper bill. Because he has such sensitive skin, like me and my sister, I couldn't let him sit in a wet diaper. Right. He would break out or whatever. And so I knew that wasn't it. And so we changed pediatricians, but the one at the time just thought it was a boil. Wow. Yeah.
Oh, we got more questions.
And I want to take the child question real quick because I have a completely different perspective. In addition to HS, I also have an extremely rare genetic condition that I have inherited. My sister, not so much. And with those two conditions combined, with HS, it wouldn't be so much, but with those two conditions combined, I've decided not to have children. And that's my personal choice. And it's not right or it's not wrong. Just like anybody else with HS, them choosing to have children, that's their choice. And if their child inherits HS, it is not their fault, and it is nothing that they did. Your genetics are not your fault. I just want to throw that out there.
I thank you for that. I do have to wrap us. I'm sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. I know you all are like filled with so many questions, and it's getting so good. But they're going to be here. So even as we, usher, into the next session, you all can ask them questions and things of that nature. So don't be afraid to walk up to them and, continue this conversation because it's really good. But thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate each one of your perspectives. And we appreciate you. Let's give a round of applause.